all y'all for coming, and I'm just going to basically go through. I've got two different PowerPoints that I wanted to try to go through in the time we have together, and they said about 2 hours or so. I'm going to be around that time, and a lot of people I know are interested in growing your own food and having it for yourselves. I do it for, it's my career. I do it. I go to farmers markets 6 days a week, and I've been doing this since 1989. I taught school for 10 years, and in an elementary setting, and I always had some type of home ec or some type of gardening with that. And each place we lived, I've always had a greenhouse connected to the house. And so that's a lot of the pictures you will see will be from the greenhouse, greenhouses that I have now, and I'll show you some of those pictures later on with that. But the biggest thing when you start growing a garden, you're going to be living in the garden, because you've got to watch things that are happening there. And to me, it's like living in heaven. I walk into the greenhouse, there's snow outside, and those green plants that are growing, and tomatoes, and it's just marvelous. And it really, for me anyway, it really makes me excited, and I love doing it. And so that's the biggest thing. You make pretty good money at it, for me, at least I've been able to keep the wolf from the door. And the biggest thing is that I enjoy doing it. And the time to plant is during the winter time, when here in North Dakota, when you really can't grow something. So that's the time when you start looking. My favorite catalog is Johnny's Select Seeds out of All Beyond Maine, and they have a lot of organic seeds, and they have a lot of open pollinated. And there's another one that's just coming here in North Dakota that's Prairie Road Organics. It's down by Oaks, and they have all their seeds open pollinated, and that's David and Teresa Pudal. I'm sure you can go online and find them, and they have a really good selection of seeds too. Probably the cheapest place, but you have to really watch them. Jordan Seeds, you can get bulk seeds, really good from them. That's out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And they do a good job with seeds, but once in a while it's not quite the quality I think that Johnny's has. But you get about half the price on some of their seeds. And if you tell them you don't want any treated seed, no GMO, then they'll make sure they don't do that for you. And this I'll talk a lot about later too, is trichlies. That's for irrigation needs, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But then I have several different books that I use. My favorite book, I can find it, is just, I had another one, the All New Garden Encyclopedia. It just goes all through the different ones in alphabetical order of different diseases and different plants, and so it's really easy to follow and a nice handbook to have. Now, when you're planting, you start thinking about what you might start doing, like what to plant and where to plant it. Now, if you have a greenhouse like I do, you start a little bit earlier. I'll start in the end of February, beginning of March to plant. I used to start in January, but it gets so expensive to try to heat the greenhouses. See, the greenhouses I have right now are heated. I'm going to talk a little bit later about high tunnels. You don't have no extra heat, and it's fairly inexpensive to set up. But this is what you have to think about. You can see the plants in this greenhouse. And like I mentioned, the seed catalogs, what sells, and a lot of things, what do you like to eat? And really in North Dakota, you can grow just about everything. And I grew things that are, like artichokes that grow in California, globe artichokes. I've grown those here. They weren't a real big seller at market, but they do grow. And they'll put 4 or 5 of the little clusters on there. But there's not a lot of food in those little things that you can eat. But then you can see the radishes here on the screen. They grow very well in North Dakota. Sometimes you get a little bit of tricky. A lot of times they like it a little bit cooler. So you can start those. You can even start outside now, and you can get radishes. And they say 26 days, but right this time of season, it usually takes about 35 or 40 to get radishes. But that's what you have to do. Your priorities have to play a big thing in what you're going to grow. And look and see. Ask your neighbors. Ask other people what they're growing in the area. And this is a list of things that I grow, but remember, I'm a market gardener, so I grow it for other people, plus for myself. And I basically listed these in order of the number that I grow. Now, and top sellers. The tomatoes, of course, is a top seller for me, and the cucumbers and potatoes. Those are the 3 top ones. And now peppers have really picked up because I grow 5 different varieties of peppers, plus hot peppers. And a lot of people say that hot peppers don't grow well here, but the early jalapeno does really well here if you like a hot pepper. And the ones outside, it's really hard to get them to turn red before the end of the season. That's why the greenhouse really comes in handy. And a high tunnel would do that same thing. You can usually gain a couple of weeks on each end. And listed up here, the onions are probably the next one. I've already put out, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. I put out 2,500 rows. I put out about 10,000 onions so far the last couple of days this week. And I get my seed from my plants from Dixondale. I don't plant the bulbs. If you get the bulbs, they're okay, but they tend to go to seed very fast. And so it's better to get the plants because they're already started growing. I liked Georgia better, but now the only place I can really find them is Texas because the other one went out of business. But I got that on a sheet listed there too for you from Dixondale Seeds. And you can buy little bunches or you can buy whole boxes. And I buy like 10 boxes each year from them. And then the carrots and beets I grow alongside the greenhouse plus outside, and those are both really big sellers and very nutritious. And kohlrabi was, I'll talk about this later too, sometimes I just try something just to see how it's going to work. And kohlrabi was one of those I tried 20-some years ago, and it went over really big. And I grow 4,000 or 5,000 every year in the kohlrabi. I grow about 1,000 or 900 or so in the greenhouse, and then the rest I put outside. And then the green beans, I like Bush Blue Lake. That's just an open pollinated variety, does very well. It likes it warmer, so I wait a little bit later. You don't really want to start it too early. And then of course the peas, that's a really big seller, but they're very time consuming picking. So, but if you like peas, they're really great fresh out of the garden. And then strawberries is not a big money maker, but I grow right now I used to grow day neutral strawberries, which are every 6 weeks they put out a new set of berries. And then there's the June berry that it bears a heavy crop in June or July. And it just bears one crop for about 2 to 4 weeks. But like I said, the day neutral, if you want just a few every now and then through the whole season, it'll be about the same amount. And TriStar and Tribute, I think, are two of the best ones that are out there for the day neutral strawberry. And then, of course, I grow the cabbage, the broccoli, and dill. My wife really likes the broccoli that's grown in the greenhouse, because outside sometimes you'll have a problem with worms, green worms getting in there. The white sulfur butterflies land and they lay the eggs there, and then the worms hatch. And you can do, soak it in salt water or that type, or you can use BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, that's organic, and you just spray it on. Basically, in layman's terms, it gives the worm a stomach ache, and it stops eating and it dies. And you can eat it and it doesn't hurt us at all. So it's just naturally occurring. And then these are some of the other ones with pumpkins. Have got a big thing lately because I grow some weedy little pumpkins and I do the big jack-o'-lanterns. But one of the favorites now at market is I used to grow something called Snack Jack, but I can't get the seed anymore. And so I went to Kakai, which is in Johnny Select Seeds, which is the naked seed pumpkin. And they're real high in zinc and high in nutrients, especially for when you have that nutrient that you need it. It's excellent for that. It has no shell on it. You can eat it raw, which I do a lot, or you can, and mixed with beets, it's really good. But you can, with raw beets, you shred them and you mix that together, and it's, believe it or not, that may not sound good, but it is really good. But you can roast them in an oven at 350 for about 30 to 45 minutes. When they start to pop, and you take them out. And they're nice and crunchy. You can put a little salt on it if you want, or just eat them just roasted, almost like a butter. And then you can see the other ones here that I grow with the lettuce and the spinach. And spinach is, I didn't bring a picture of those, I should have later, but I grow what they call a Malabar spinach, and it doesn't bolt like your Bloomsdale. They tend to bloat if it gets hot. The weather in North Dakota, you get real cold and then all of you maybe have a day of spring, and then boom, it's summer. It gets hot quick. So a lot of the spinaches just go up and bolt, they'll start to seed. And so this one does not. This Malabar spinach is a bigger seeded spinach, and it produces a vine. And I've had them in the greenhouse, and they'll grow all summer. And outside, they even grow pretty good. Not as good outside. Yes? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh.
Question on your watermelon. Do you grow seeded watermelon in one brand?
I'll get into that a little bit later too, but I do grow 5, 6 varieties of watermelon, and I do all seeded watermelon. And the one that I was talking about, that Prairie Road Organic down by Oaks, they have one that's, what's it called now? Prairie Road, Dakota Rose. Dakota Rose watermelon. He developed that after 30 years, and it's an open pollinated. You just plant the seed. I get the new seed from him, but I grow so many ones they would cross with other things, so I don't save the seed. But it's a red watermelon. It's seeded, but it's very sweet. It does good in this climate because it was basically bred here in this climate for that. And then I do the yellow dollar, which is a good one. Then I do sweet favorite, and I do Carmen and sugar baby. Sugar baby is just a small icebox melon, and it'll always make it. It's a short season melon. And then the greens that I grow, like Swiss chars, and the honeydew, I haven't grown that for years. I'm trying a new one this year from Johnny's. He's had a shorter season one, and I'm going to see what it does. My son, he likes that better than the cantaloupes. And then, of course, scallions is just small onions. You can get some that have a straight shoot on them that will never bulb. They have a white Lisbon, and then they have some other, a Japanese Tokyo long. And there's some different ones you can grow, but I just use the regular onion, and I just plant a whole bunch together in a hole, and I'll show you that in a little screen later on. And then the winter and summer squash, and I grow 5 varieties of winter squash and 2 varieties of the summer. And that's of course, the summer squash is the yellow crookneck, and then the zucchini. And down in Tennessee, when I grew it there, I grew a lot of the patty pan and some of the other exotics, but nobody up here seems to like those. So I grow what people like. And I like the yellow squash and zucchini. Of course, the yellow squash is my favorite by far. And like I mentioned earlier, try something new every year. This is one that I tried. This one is no longer available. It was called, at that time, was Perfection. But now I'm growing a one called Bianca. And Bianca's in Johnny Select Seeds. And it does very similar. They kind of have a white, they turn yellow, then they turn orange, then they turn red. And so you have a big array of color scheme on those. And they're very, very good plant, really. And you can see the strings I have, and I'll tell you a little bit about those later on. A lot of times you have to decide where are you going to plant seeds or are you going to plant plants, and what you do in the garden with those. And some of the time, most seed catalogs will tell you if you can grow transplants from that variety or if you have to plant them straight from seeds. And you can see here that on the screen, these are beets and radishes, and there's peas over here, there's carrots on this far side, you can't really tell them. And way in the back, that's onions back there on white plastic. But anyway, that's something you have to decide what you want to grow with. And I grow transplants, and I use a soil thermometer. You can just stick that in the soil, it tells you what your temperature of your soil is. Now, probably next week, I'm hoping the soil temperature will be enough. I'll start planting potatoes. Usually if it gets 50, 55, you want before you really put them out, because they're just going to set anyway if the temperature's not warm enough. And some things, like if you plant some of your super sweet corns outside, since mine have no fungicide, no treatment on them, I have to wait for the temperature to get 60 to 65 before I plant those seeds. Or else you'll lose half of them, they'll rot in the soil and won't even grow. And with the transplants for tomatoes, most people say 55, 60 is good enough, but I like to be close to 65 before I plant them. And in the greenhouse, that temperature, even without heat, will approach that in the greenhouse in the middle of March. And so you could plant them in there even without heat for a while, but then they don't grow as, a tomato, once it gets below 65, a lot of varieties will not set fruit. And above 95, they won't set fruit. So you have to watch that parameters. And you can see in how these, I just plant them 16 inches apart, and they're about 20 inches apart diagonally. And after a while, I will switch that to, you can see these, I've switched to orange strings now. These are white strings that come down, and I clip, there's a string, there's 2 different types. This is kind of expensive to get. They're like $3.65, and this you get for like 18 cents. And I just wrap the strings around them. And they have a little hook that supports the plant. It has just a little barbs on the back side of it, and when I clip it on the string, it holds a lot of weight. Believe it or not, those tomato plants can have 20, 30 pounds of tomatoes on one plant, and if you go through the greenhouse, you've got several thousand pounds of fruit hanging on there. And there's a wire. You can see the white things here. That's these reels hanging from up there. And that hangs down, and there's a wire that goes across that's tied to the back post and way to the front post in the front of the greenhouse. And all these are hooked on there. And so that's not hooked anyplace else. There's a bar, see these bars going across? These bars are every 8 feet across there. And they call it this, basically it's a system for holding up the tomatoes. I used to just stick a piece of wood up there with wires across it just to hold them up. So you can do, a lot of people use hot panels just to stick them through to hold them up. Or you can use the concrete wire, reinforcing wire, you've seen that? People just make cages out of that and let them go in that. And they've done that even in greenhouses or high tunnels. But the reason that I do this, you can get a lot more fruit in per square foot if you just left the plant grow. And these are all trimmed. And I don't know if later on I might be able to slide and it'll show you. Yeah, I think you can see it. See a branch here, and there's another stem coming up here. This stem will be broken off, and it's trained to one stem going up that line. Because if you didn't, you couldn't even walk in there. It would be a mess. And you can see what happens to them. They just they'll reach all the way to the top. Now usually, you can lean and lower these. That's what they do in hydroponics. And I've done this, but usually by the time they get there, I'm so busy with markets I don't have time. And to hire somebody else to do it, it just doesn't pay to do it. But these will set fruit about every 8 inches to a foot. They'll have another cluster of fruit all the way up. But a lot of times when it gets up this high, it's too hot. 95 degrees, like I said, they won't set fruit. And then they'll fall over. You can see some up here that are setting. But they'll fall over and come back down. And most of the time they won't break off, and they'll support fruit on there, but it gets to be a jungle. And then they'll start bearing again a little bit later. So I usually have a 2 week in there that has a lull period because of that. But if I leaned and if I lowered them, I'd probably be able to get away with not having that problem. But if you grow them outside, you can just let them grow. And there's 2 types. These are all what they call indeterminates. In other words, they can grow for a year if you want them to. A determinate plant grows to a certain height, stops, and it's done. And that's a good one for outside. They have several varieties that you can do that with. And Celebrity is one of those. It's a good whole variety that's pretty crack resistant and has good flavor. And it'll do that. And there's several ones. You can look at the catalog. They'll tell you whether it's determinate or indeterminate. And this is the favorite thing that I grow. And these are cucumber plants. And when I talked about transplants, I'll talk about that later too, about the distance you have to wait. Now these I put in, they come in little sets like this. There's usually 10 or 12 in a packet. These are peat pots, and the spit made from peat pots is compressed. And I put the soil into here, and I punch a hole and put the seed in it. And I let it stay in there. These smaller pots, you don't want to let it very long. These plants are about 3 to 5 days old. And that's from the time I put the seed in there. They'll germinate in about 3 to 5 days. And they came up, and then the minute they come up, I try to transfer them. And then the biggest thing with these, you want to make sure that soil covers the top. If it doesn't, then I rip off the top of it and make sure I put soil over that. So that's covered at least about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And so then the plants will really take off. And you can see in here, there's a drip line. That's like these drip lines. And the drip line it's a real conservative way to water because it drips every 8 inches, 8 to 12 inches. I used to go 12 inches, now I've switched all to 8-inch drips. And so every 8 inches is a little cut slit in there and it just drips out. And you can, off a normal house well, I can run these greenhouses pretty easily even because this only goes like 0.5 gallons per hour that it drips out. So in 1,000 feet, you're only using not even 5 gallons. So I'll use about 2.5 gallons. And they have a low flow and high flow. They'll tell you in the catalog that. You can look at that and they'll tell how much it drips out per 100 feet. And then you can multiply that out and see a house well could easily handle 10 to 12 rows that are 300 feet long because you're using minimal amount of water. Where if you put a sprinkler on that, a sprinkler that's getting 8 or 10 gallons a minute, it's a lot of wasted water. But some of my stuff I still do that, especially for strawberries. But you can see these plants, the first 3 or 4 weeks, they're pretty slow. And after that, I clip them twice a week because they grow that fast. And you can see, I don't see the other, there's a clip, I usually clip them see one in there though. But usually I'll clip it at the bottom, then I clip it knee high, waist high, and shoulder high, and then I head high, about 4 or 5 clips. Now tomatoes will have 10 or 12 in that same amount. But, and you can see this branch here? This should be cut off or taken off because I train it to one stem. And there'll be new ones that come off on the sides, but there'll be also fruiting stems. You gotta watch for the fruit because you don't want to take those off. But the first part, most books will tell you 11 nodes, and that's from the hydroponics, but for me, I usually go about 7 or 8 nodes. That means you just count the leaves, how many leaves there are there, and then you let it start fruiting. Let me go to the next slide. And this goes all the way to the top. You can see these blossoms here. That sets fruit. You can see these are, this variety is called Socrates, and it's about an 8-inch burpless cucumber, and it doesn't have any seeds in it, which is a big marketing thing, because a lot of people don't like the seeds in the cucumbers. But I was trying to see, okay, there's a clip here, and then I usually have some green tapes. It's called a tapener, and it's a lot faster, and I just clip that around the stem. I should have brought that with me, but I didn't. I can show you that when you go to the greenhouses in May. I can show you the tapener and how that's done. But then these fruits set all up and down that, and like I said, there's a clip here, and there's one probably up there. But it sets abundant fruit. And this fruit, believe it or not, I pick it every day when I'm going to markets. I'll pick these. This is ready. These two are ready to be picked. This one's borderline, but by tomorrow that one will be as big as these. It grows that fast. And then like I said, I make use of every bit of space that I have. And these are the carrots along the side, and there's beets on this side. And that's just from seed. I have a little seeder that I just push down the row, and it plants those and does very well with them. And when you walk in there and see this, it's just amazing all the green that's there. And beets tend to get very thick very fast, and because they have the seed has a cluster of seeds, and so there's like 5 and 10 in that one little cluster. So that's why it's really hard to get seeds to spread out. And so what I'm going to try this year, I hadn't tried that before, but I've done it out in the garden and it's worked. So I'm going to try to take, back to here. I'm going to take thin these plants out, and I've got a planter that I can plant outside with. You can ride on it and stick the seeds in some wheels that close and just plant those outside and see if and put them about 4 to 6 inches apart and see if they'll grow faster outside, because they're way too crowded in here. And you can see what happens with these. Oops, I keep hitting the wrong button. These vines get so thick in here, they only get sun from one side. And so they start growing a little bit slower. But I have them early. The baby beets are really a big seller in the market. And they're really, with the baby beets, a lot of people don't realize this, but you can throw the beet and the greens all in the kettle together, cook it all together when they're real small beets, and really good and just delicious. And you don't even have to worry about slipping the skin like you do with the normal beets. And these are transplants that go outside. This particular one I think is cabbage, and I had some kohlrabi I think in there too. This is one of the older wooden greenhouses that I had that I took down, and I put up some metal ones. I had this about 15 years. It was starting to rot out and starting to get wind whipped. But so I've got that setting at the house, using for something for grapes or something, but I haven't done anything with it yet. And this is the computer. I have now a new computer that came out. This one they don't make anymore, but I got an iGrow 1400. But basically this computer controls six parts of cooling and 6 of heating. Now a lot of you won't even worry about messing with that, so I'm going to go through that pretty fast, but I can talk about that later. This will tell me the humidity and temperature of this old fan that keeps the air circulating through it. Now the one that had it before I did, he used a thermostat. You can just hook up the regular thermostat wire, and you could do it that way too. But sometimes your heating and cooling tend to overlap more. On the computer, you can adjust so it doesn't overlap, so the fans don't come on when the heating's going on. And this is the part I think that's the best, is growing your own transplants. Because you can't get the variety sometimes at these greenhouses or nurseries. They grow a lot of times what sells or what's the easiest one to get, and they won't buy expensive seed a lot of times. And with this, you can just go ahead and do that. And this is mixed that I mixed myself. This is a mixture of perlite, vermiculite, and peat moss. And I can even pass some of those around if you want to. You can even open it up. It's not that maybe a little bit messy, but not bad. You can go just Ziploc bag and they'll close back up. But it's fine. Sometimes I use the coarse for the other plants, but this is a finer. And the biggest advantage to using this soil mix is it's about a 5.5 pH. My water is about an 8 pH, so it comes out about perfect when I add the water to it. But have you ever heard of dampening off? Dampening off is a disease that is always in the soil. And if you plant transplants in regular soil from outside and you don't keep fans or air across that, they tend to rot off at the bottom. That's called dampening off. But if you keep air on it, you can get by with it. But this you have no problem because that pathogens can't grow in this peat moss with a high pH. So this is, you can buy these at the store. I try these. A lot of people sell you ones with already fertilizer and stuff mixed in with it. You don't need fertilizer to start seeds. In fact, they don't really like it. And so all you need is the moisture and heat. And I'll tell you, I grow mine in this is 288, and that's why they call it in the industry, because there's 288 holes there. And the flat is called a 1020 because it's about 10 inches by 20 inches, and it holds these trays. And then I transplant them later either to these, which are 1204s. There's 12 packs that fit in here that have 4 each. Or you can be this one is called a 1206, and basically there's 12 little trays with 6 in each one. And these are what I use for transplanting my cabbage and kohlrabi and a lot of those. And I'll tell you the cedar thing a little bit later here. But you want to keep those, let's see, where is this? Whoops. I just use a shop light with one cool and one warm. I think that works the best. I switched a few years back and I tried some more expensive bulbs. They were like $10 to $12 per bulb. They were a daylight bulb, and I saw no difference. In fact, I thought they grew better using these cheaper lights. If you get them on sale, you can get these for $1 or $2. Basically, the cool light is a blue spectrum. The warm light is a red spectrum. So you get both spectrums that are in there. And so it's just with an inexpensive shop fixture, you can do very well with it. And you keep that within 1 to 3 inches of the plants. I think that's in your handout that I gave you too, because I may not mention everything that's in there. And then the temperature about 70 to 80 degrees. If it gets much above 80, 85, it tends to weaken the plant for some reason. I don't know why, but it does. So you want to try to keep it in about those ranges. Now if you do lettuce won't even germinate above 75 degrees. So it's cool season, so you want it to be cooler. And I have right here, homemade vacuum seeder. This is the ones I just showed you. And basically, I made an attachment on the bottom that you can put a vacuum hose right into. You just plug the hose in, turn the vacuum on, and I just spread the seeds in, throw the seeds in here, and all I have to do is just shake it a little bit, and the seeds fall out into a pot. But each one of these holes, the seed sticks to. And then with the vacuum still running, I just take that seeder with it connected to the hose. Of course, you don't want it to fall out. And all you do is just flip it upside down on here, and I just turn it off. And then the seeds all fall in those little holes, and then I throw a little bit of dirt back on top of it. So it's very efficient. It works really good, especially when you're doing a lot of them like I am. But the thing is, you don't need to be that fancy. You can just take like, when I first started, I made wooden trays. I just tacked wooden trays together with plywood on the bottom, throw the dirt in, and you can just make little lines across and just sprinkle your seed in that soil. And then let it come up, and then you can transplant it to like the 1206s or other trays. Or you can, if you've saved little cartons or little milk cartons or little styrofoam cups, you can transplant it to those. So it doesn't have to be real complicated. But and that cedar, if you wanted to buy the cedar in the catalog, the cedar just by itself would cost you $500. And this I built for less than 10 with all the supplies and everything with it. And these press plates are very, most of the time you can still get that at some of the smaller printing shops. And I think I make 2 or 3 of these plates out of each one. Now this one, it has pretty big size holes in it. Now this one you can probably, and I put the holes in myself. I just marked it out. Now this one, if I held it up to the light a little bit, you can see the little tiny holes in there. And it's made with a little pin. You can pass it around. Just be careful you don't cut yourself on it. But this is, all it is just an aluminum sheet. And it's very easy to take a nail or a pin to punch the holes in them. And you can make them bigger or smaller or any number you want. If you wanted to make those for the 1206s, you just wanted to seed a few plants, you can make a plate that has the 72 holes in it and just flip it over on here and the seeds are in there. Sometimes you may get a double seed, especially if tomatoes and peppers, they tend to double up. But any cabbage family ones are real easy to plant on those and some of the others. And you can move them around with your finger too if you want to take some off. And the plants, starting transplants, now for the greenhouse, of course, I can start them a lot earlier. And usually I would cut, if you don't have a heated greenhouse, if you had like a high tunnel, you could just start a couple weeks earlier than the frost date outside, and you'd still be way ahead of the game, unbelievably. And for the peppers really like 6 to 10 weeks, and I'd go longer, even the 8 to 10 weeks here on this one, because if you set them out when they're young, if they do get frosted, they're done. But if they're older plants, the ones that I've had some pepper plants that I put for the greenhouse, and I had extra ones, and I set those outside. They have a little bit bigger stem on them. They would freeze, if the stem did happen to freeze off, it would come right back from the stems. It wouldn't kill the stems because they're a lot older plant, and some of those were 12 to 16 weeks. Now most plants, if you have like broccoli for instance, if you have broccoli, 6 weeks or so is about the max you want to have those in those old trays. Because if you're not, they'll you know what you call forcing? A lot of times greenhouses will force plants to come to blossom early. That's because they're in a confined area. Broccoli will do the same thing. And you'll get a little tiny head of broccoli, which isn't much good. So you want to plant them in about 4 to 6 weeks, have them planted. So if you start your seed 4 to 6 weeks, it's plenty early enough. And I like tomatoes that way too, but you can transfer them to bigger pots. If you go to you can maybe gain an extra week with this, but if you go to a 4-inch pot, you could probably gain an extra 3 weeks. And that's something good. If I was, wasn't doing market gardening, I think I might do that, start with bigger pots, and then you could set them outside and probably even have tomatoes by the 4th of July. And I've done that before, but it takes a lot more work than I want to put into it, because you have a big pot with a tomato, you have to dig a hole in the ground to put in. And I put mine on plastic, but I'll show you later too. You can see these here. This is kohlrabi put on white plastic. And a lot of times now I've switched to the black because the white is getting so expensive, and the suppliers are having a hard time getting it for some reason, I don't know why. But then you can see here the kohlrabi that I set out. And kohlrabi, once you set that out, usually about 45 days you'll have kohlrabi. And it grows really quick. Yes.
Is it plastic for weed control?
Yes, plastic is for weed control, and plus it keeps the moisture there. You can see, let's see these little lines there? They connect to what I call a header line. And this header line, I put these every 3 feet, and I was cultivating, so I just disconnected those from here, and then I put the lines up in there, then I cultivate, then I can reconnect it back up. And it's very easy to, I just blow on the tube, and this turns in and out. So when it turns out, then all I have to do is wiggle that back and forth, and then I pull that on there, and then that's tight on there. Yes?
Is the plastic better than that black cloth? I used black cloth last year.
The black cloth is very expensive, and this is a lot cheaper. I just bought let's see, what was it? It was $90-some for about a 3,000-foot roller. And so you get, and the drip takes that I use 8 mil, I use 8-inch, I use the high flow, but that's for a 7,500-foot roll, cost me $143. And so if you figure that out, it's just a few cents a foot.
Where do you buy your black cloth or your plastic?
Either Zimmerman Irrigation out of Michigan or Jordan, and Jordan is a little bit cheaper for shipping, so if you're not getting a lot, that'd be the better place to go. and that's listed in the sheet, in the printout that I gave out. That should be listed on there. But anyway, this connects to the pump. You can reduce that down to, and a lot of times, so I can bring that in, you can put a filter on that and a pressure reducer on the end of it, and just plug these all together and plug your hose into it. But if you have a small garden, you can buy, this is basically goes right to a garden hose. And you can run that up and back and forth, but they say not to run much more than 500 feet. But 300 is what I usually run on mine. But this connects right to a garden hose, and this will go right out. And if you have a break, or this is a little splice in there, just like these. And that's just if it cuts or breaks or gopher chews it, you put it on. And I lay mine mostly on top of the ground or under the plastic. And most people say that they like to put it in the ground. You can, but if you're cultivating, it's really easy to cut it. And if you have a leak, you don't really tell it real easy. And it's really a mess to try to take care of it.
Question?
Yes. I missed. Oh, yes.
With, with that black plastic or any of that, you have a lot of slugs. They really like that to go under there and hide.
Yeah, any moist environment a slug likes. We haven't had too much because it's pretty dry up in North Dakota most of the time. But usually you can put out, like don't drink it, but just put out beer or something in a little low platter. They'll go right into that and they'll kill themselves. So you can do a lot of things that just buried like in the ground. They just crawl right into it. They're dead.
Do you use beer for them then?
I've never had any. I haven't had any problem with slugs.
Oh, you're lucky.
Yep, lucky with those. I problem this year, the first year I've ever had problems with cutworms, and so they're crazy. But I got a bunch of manure from a dairy farmer that was composting it. It's supposed to be really good, and I put that in. And I found out I had lots of cutworms this year. And I'm not sure if the manure or I might have let weeds get a little bit too big, and the moths came and laid the eggs, and there could have been a number of different things. But anyway, I'm fighting with that. There's a lot of things I can do about that, but I'm still working with it, fighting with it. But this is transplanting outside. I usually start planting about the 15th. I've already put my onions out. I've got some lettuce outside, mostly for family instead of just for market, because that's too early for market. But the onions will be fine for that. But the cabbage and broccoli, about 4 to 8 weeks. And so if I'm going to put it out, if I want to put them out in April, or say, most people think cold season, May 15 is pretty good for cold season crops in North Dakota, and about first part of June for the warm season. And some people say, well, that's kind of late. But if you want to take care of it, you can get a smaller part, you can take care of it. But if you have a large amount, you've got to be careful how early you set some of that stuff out, because you've got to cover it up if it's going to freeze or frost. And just when I set the onions out, they said it was going to be 35 degrees at night. It ended up being 25, but 2 or 3 nights ago it was 25 instead of 35. And so I had some candy apple onions that I set out that it frosted a little bit, burned the top of the leaf, but the bottom, since it was in the plastic, it's still coming green, so I think they'll still make it. But usually I like to give the onions 2 to 3 days above freezing before it's going to get cold, because they'll take it down in the teens after they get set in. An onion doesn't bother them. And the cucumber, squash, and melons, I put all those in these little pots. But like I said, 2 to 4 weeks I set them out. My pickling cucumbers I set out in less than a week. The minute they germinate, I want to get them out. And again, you might make sure this does not come above the soil, because it acts like a wick and it dries out, and it's like a cement wall. The roots can't go through it. But if it's wet, they'll grow right through it. You can make your own out of newspapers or paper if you want to. Let's see. Smells like I'm doing here. This is what I was telling you about these are onions on the white plastic. Those are planted one at a time by hand. So I had to be a little bit crazy. And I'm one of these, I can bend over the waist like this. And the guy helped me, says, how do you do that all day? He said, you should be in the Guinness Book of World Records. But I guess that's heredity from my mom. She can do it too. So, but these onions, you can see how well they grow on the plastic here. And there's 4 rows in there. They're 6 inches apart both ways. And there's a drip line down the center of the double row. Yes?
What's the difference between white and black plastic?
The reason I like the white is they stay green longer, and it keeps the soil cool. Onions don't really like it real hot. And it dries out the soil faster. Plus, one thing that I found with it is the weeds don't germinate near as fast in this white plastic as they do in the black. I have a lot more problem with the black, but the onions do come a little bit faster in the black plastic.
Can you use just regular plastic bags like or from heavy plastic, or what kind of plastic is it?
This is regular, this is made this plastic is 4 foot long, and I've got a machine that lays it. You can lay it by hand. I do it all in the greenhouse, it's all by hand. All the plastic in the greenhouse. And I'll show you some other ones I think in a little bit. But you can see, and I have, let's see, 4 or 5 varieties of onions here that I grow. But
Is it
as
white?
far as the paper bags and stuff, I think you'd have a real problem with trying to keep that much down. It's better to, can use clear plastic, but the weeds come under it so bad, it's really a big fight. A lot of people like to use it. It warms the soil up faster than the white, of course, or the black. And the black has to make good contact with the soil to warm it up. So now they have what they call thermal mulches. They have a green and they have a red. And the green is really, really good because it keeps the weeds down better. The red is a little bit touchy because it does let the weeds go more and pushes the plastic up.
Where do you buy it at?
You can buy it from George Like Seeds. I think there's a place in Dickinson you can get it to. And on the sheet, you can, I think I have Trickley's listed too. Yeah, Trickley's company, you can get it from there, and Jordan, I have that listed, I think, too. Yeah, Jordan Seeds Incorporated out of Woodbury, Minnesota, they have it too. And it's on your sheet. And they have the website, you can go on that website to catch that too. Let me move. Now this is, like I say, I have a jig that I use, I push in the ground that does these onions. I made it out of rebar, just welded it together, and I just go down and punch it in the ground. It overlaps. I have one little one that overlaps the other one, so I can make it even all the way down. And I can usually do a 300-foot row, I can usually do in about 15 minutes down and back. On a good day, I've done it in 8, but that's really when the drip line is just perfect and everything is running good. And these are all sorts of melons and cantaloupe, and you can see on the far side that's potatoes, and this is corn on the back side land that I rent out. And just in passing, I was mentioned that, so you can use old equipment. This Ford planter I got from a retired farmer that didn't use it anymore, and it was probably 50s model. It was a 4-row corn planter, and it has little metal plates on it, and I just use that, and that's what I plant my corn with. And it works really well. And weeding is done too. I have a 2-row tractor cultivator that I cultivate through here with. The biggest thing is there, when I do that, I have to pull the drip lines up to be able to cross them. Some people say you can't run across, but if you run across, I have some valves. This is a valve. You can turn it off. It is tight, especially when they're new. You turn that valve off and the water, if you have 20 lines and your well won't, you supply 10 of those at a time. You turn 10 off, and then 10 on, turn those 10 off, and turn the next 10 on. I have one well by the cemetery that I have a 300-foot row, and I have like 100 different valves on there. I can only do 10 of those at a time, so I turn all the others off, and I turn the 10 on. And I go out of those for about 6 hours and keep moving down the line. So, but you won't have to worry about something that big. They do have packages in the catalogs that you can do too with those. Okay, now I use a Troy-Bilt tiller. That's a rear tine tiller. It does a really good job. Now, like I said before, some of you have heard of the Roost Out No Work Garden, and they also have the Eden Back to Eden garden. They use wood chips. Now, for a small area, that is an excellent way to do it. Now, the wood chips, you want to make sure they're 6 months to a year old. It's good to have them older when you put them on, and you do not want to mix them in the soil. You let them stay and decompose on top. The best way the best no-work garden there's no such thing as a no-work garden, but the best one I've seen is that when I was talking about that Dane in Pudal, for 30 years, he's never tilled his garden. And what he uses, he adds 6 inches of alfalfa every year. And he has you could the tilt of that soil under there is unbelievable. But he's done it for 30 years. And he adds this, he pulls it back when he plants in the spring, and then pushes it back together. And most of the time, the greenhouses, I carry all the plants and stuff out. He said he just throws the plants down on top of the mulch and throws more stuff on top of them. And he doesn't have any problem with diseases. He does it real well. And that's Dan and David Pudoff, that's down by Oaks. And he does a really good job with that. And you can. And that's about a 30 by 150, which is a pretty good sized garden that he does this with. And I was gonna, a lot of hand weeding, pulling all the weeds out. But this is, if you don't have one, this is called a scuffle or a steer hoe. And this hoe is a lifesaver, especially along plastic. I like the beveled edge on it because you can get them to have the flat edge, and that's good too if you can't get these others. And this one is from Johnny Select Seeds, and you can change the blades. It has little screws in the side and little nuts, and if that blade gets worn out, you can change to another blade. And basically, with the regular garden hoe, you know you're beating the ground all the time. With a scuffle hoe, you just move it back and forth. You never have to pick it up. You just move that, and I go along the sides of the plastic, and you can do a 300-foot roll of plastic in 10, 15 minutes if you don't let the weeds get too big. If you're in time. But it's a time saver, and it really works really well for close to the plants.